Hello everyone. Yes, back in the greenhouse again, and for the next couple of months I'm going to be spending quite a bit of time in here because this is essentially my powerhouse. This is where I get all my seeds going, pot on a load of seeds and seedlings in the colder part of the months because I do have some heating in here. I have a frost heater over there. I've got this great big thing you probably can't see. It's my beast propagator. So I use this to get seeds going early in the season. And today is all about sowing onions. And I'm just sieving some compost first. You can see there, it took about 30 seconds to sieve some compost to fill a couple of these little trays, which will do for the sowing of my onions. There we go. And they're now ready for sowing onions. I'll just lightly pat them down and then we'll sow some seeds into them. Now, this compost has come, the whole bag has come out of the house this morning. It was in my kitchen. And I do that just to warm it up slightly, because if you've got a bag of compost out in your greenhouse or in your polytunnel or your shed or garage or somewhere, it's going to be cold. And you really want some temperature in there. It doesn't have to be mega hot. For sowing onions, you've got a temperature range of about between 10 and 16 degrees. 13 is about perfect if you can get and maintain that temperature. So you don't need a propagator to get them going. A cold windowsill or a cool windowsill is perfect. So a kitchen windowsill, because generally most people's kitchens aren't heated and they only get hot a couple of times a day when you're doing a little bit of cooking in there. The rest of the time they'll be lower than 20 degrees, which is in the right range for onion seed. So as I say, you don't need propagators, just a windowsill. And what I do at the end is I just pop one of these propagator lids on. I open the vent. There's a little vent on the top. You can open or close it. That's now open, just so that the condensation doesn't build up too much and the heat doesn't build up too much, because onions are a nice cool weather crop. And once you've sown these onions, you'll let them grow up, and eventually they'll grow up probably about that tall, an inch or two tall, and then the top of it will bend over like this, literally like almost at right angles, and they call that the crux stage. When you get to that, you gently take hold of the stem of the onion, use a seed label or a dibber, get underneath it and lift it and pot it on into modules. You can sow seeds directly into modules if you want. It's not my preferred way of doing things, simply because it takes up more space, and I prefer, if possible, to use less space because I grow a lot of plants and I need the space. Now we'll get set up for sowing these onions and we'll show you how we get on with them. Now I've got two types of onions here. This one is a Bedfordshire Champion, and this is an old time favourite, and it is my favourite of all, really. And I'm just going to broadcast these seeds by scattering them on here. There'll probably be 40 or 50 seeds in this pot when I'm done, and I'm just looking to space them out as evenly as possible. I'm not being too pernickety about it, because as I say, later on I'm going to pick them out anyway. So that's the Bedfordshire, and then one that many of you will know of is the Kelsey onion. I'm going to do exactly the same with that on here. There's fewer seeds in here. How many seeds are in this one? 120. So I won't want to use all of those. There we go, that's the Kelsey done. And then all we need to do then is just scatter a bit of sieved compost on the top, like so. Just level them off roughly, and I'm just going to wet the top. Now somebody commented recently about this. This bottle's come from the kitchen. It's got cold water in and a bit of water from the warm tap, just simply because I don't want to put cold water onto this warmed compost. They will now go onto a tray on my kitchen windowsill, and I'll water from underneath as well to get that fully wet. And then we'll pop a lid on like so, and then we'll just leave it, and we should get germination within 2 weeks. Now, the observant among you will notice I've got 3 pots here, because one I sowed on Boxing Day, and that's my mammoth red onions. I don't know where the seeds have gone now, they're here somewhere. But anyway, yeah, they're my mammoth red onions, great big red onions, hopefully, because I don't have a great deal of luck with red onions. But sowed them on Boxing Day because that is the traditional day to sow your onions on. Now, there's a lot of conjecture about this. People say it is, people say it isn't. But for me, it is, because 50 years ago, that's how I started. And I can remember going down to the allotments in our village, and every greenhouse would have a bloke in it sowing his onions. That's what was done there. And that was for a few reasons, really. One of them quite amusing. The first one was because those who were growing onions for shows would want to start their onions nice and early, and Boxing Day was a good day to start them. Nowadays, those show growers will actually start them somewhere in November if they've got all the proper protection and lights and heating and all those kinds of things. But back then, the day was the best day to do it was Boxing Day. And the other reason was, and this is the amusing bit, is that it was to get the old man of the house out of the Christmas spirit, if you like. You know, he's sick of kids playing around with noisy toys, and he was off down the allotments to get away from it all. And I can remember it used to be the same every year. They'd be down the allotments in the morning sowing their onion seeds. They might gather around somebody's shed for a cup of tea. Then they go off to the bookmakers and put a bet on for the horses on Boxing Day. Then they might even go off to the pub and have a couple of pints before going home and sitting down to dinner. But that was the done thing back then. Probably still is in some places. And that's the tradition of sowing onions on Boxing Day. Now for me, it's more about spreading the season out. So I've now got my onions sown, and hopefully in a couple of weeks I'll be potting these on, because that's what I'll need to do. I'll need to take them out, pot them on into modules and grow them on. That's another seed out of the way and done and dusted. And it means that in a couple of weeks I can get something else on and going, get something else started, and so spread my sowing and growing throughout the year, rather than getting to a weekend and thinking, oh, blooming heck, I haven't done anything, I must get everything sowed in these 2 days. So for me, it's spreading the season out and spreading the load out so that I'm not overwhelmed with seeds and growing stuff on. So that's the tradition with sowing them on Boxing Day. Now, I have seen over the years a lot of other people, they've been sowing leeks also on Boxing Day, and they've actually termed it as traditional sowing leeks on Boxing Day. It is and it isn't. Those who were growing leeks for shows back when I was a kid were doing it because they were showing their leeks at autumn shows, so somewhere in August, September time. And they wanted their leeks mature for that time to be the biggest and best for the show that they could produce. But the problem with that is, if you're starting them this early, if you're starting them on Boxing Day or very, very early January, your leeks have matured, but they've still got growing time before the growing season ends. I mean, we all know here in the UK that the cold weather generally sets in October. So if your leeks mature at the end of July, starting of August, you've still got 2 months of warmish weather where those leeks will carry on growing. And what that does is it sets your flowers to seed, makes them run and flower, which is not good for your leeks. What ideally you want is to grow your leeks and grow them so that they're just about fully grown when the cold weather sets in, so that they can stand in the soil all winter. So therefore you've got your winter crop. And so that's vitally important. That's why I don't sow mine until about the end of February or even into March, because what you're looking for is pencil thin leeks around the end of June, July to plant out, so that they grow in time but don't go to flower or run to seed. And this is why it gets my goat up a little bit. I get a little bit upset when somebody says it's traditional. It is if you're going to exhibit or take them to a show. Otherwise, sow them much later. And it's the same with shallots. You can sow shallots and leeks now if you want to, but wait till March for shallots. You don't need that greater lead time on them to get them going. So shallots in March, leeks even in March, and they'll all grow and you'll have plenty of crops later. Now the reason we sieve the compost is pretty simple. You saw earlier it takes no time at all to sieve a little bit of compost to fill a pot up with, and the reason is twofold. The soil comes out nice and fine, so therefore the tiny seeds that you're sowing into there are easily encapsulated by that soil. Therefore, with the moisture in the soil, it fully encapsulates your seed and it gives you better germination rates. Yes, you can use lumpy compost straight out of the bag and press it down, but your germination will be nowhere near as good as if you use sieved compost. And the second reason is simply this: when you come to prick these seedlings out later, they're not grabbing hold of some of these lumps. The roots aren't wrapping themselves around it, so you're tugging on a seedling that's wrapped around some of these lumps, which is then pressed down amongst the compost, and then when you pull the seedling, you break the roots. If you use sieved compost, that doesn't happen. You end up with better germination and better plants because of it. And for a simple 30-second sieving of compost, it just makes sense to do it. Now, when you're potting them on, you pot them on one seedling into a little module. I would recommend in your standard size trays, a 40 cell tray, put them on into that. And bear in mind that when the roots come out the bottom, that's time for it to move on. You don't want the roots spiraling round, so when they come out the bottom, they're at that point where they're about to spiral around the module. If you get to that point with them, they either want planting out in the ground if the ground is ready, or they want potting on again into, again, the same size tray, but maybe a 24 cell module, a bigger module. You don't want to go straight to a 24 cell module because that will hold too much moisture, and there's too much. What you want is you want the seedling to use up the moisture in that tray and then for you to give them more. You don't want it to be sat in wet, constantly wet compost, because they can drown. So this is the reason why we go up through the cell trays to the different cells every time. You could even end up coming out of a 24 cell module into 3-inch pots. If they need potted on before the soil outside is ready, then you need to pot them on. You don't want them spiraling round and round. Now, when the soil outside is ready, it's when it's warming up, when we've had enough warm sunshine, when the ground is dry enough, when it's been worked and it's ready to accept the plants. You want the plants to go into an environment where it's warm enough to where the plant thinks, oh, this is nice, this is cosy, I'll get my roots out into this. If it's cold, wet soil, it's just going to think, oh no, I'm going to stay where I am, thank you very much. And therefore your plants aren't going to do any good. So you have to be the judge of that, of whether the soil is ready or not for you to plant. But in general, it's round about the end of March, maybe into April, maybe as late as that. Again, it's weather dependence. There we go. Now, I recently took part in a live show over on Tony Smith's Potty Mouth Gardening Club, and there's myself, Tony, and JB from Naturally JB, and we spent a whole hour on Boxing Day talking about onions, growing onions, and all the tips. Anything I've missed, it's bound to be on there, and there's more tips since, along with that. So I would recommend that you go over, subscribe over there, have a look, watch that video. Any of the tips that I've missed that I gave on there are still on there, and it's a mine of information, so go and have a look at that. But that's it for this one. Don't forget to subscribe if this is your first time here. That way you won't miss any of my future content. But for now, look after yourselves, stay safe, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Ta-ra now.